Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of paranormal stories for you to enjoy. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. About 3.5 years ago, my mother miscarried. The day she lost the baby, I was in high school, and I suddenly had a bad feeling that something bad happened. I told my friend at the time that I thought something was wrong with my family, and immediately after, I vomited in the classroom. The teacher sent me home, and my mother told me she had miscarried, and I was just kind of like, I knew it. I always had a bad feeling about this baby, and couldn't really be happy that I'd be a big sister soon. Then about 2 years later, my mum was pregnant again, and things were going well. She was supposed to give birth about the 20th of April. I think it was the 5th of April when I started to feel on edge. A day before I had a weird dream when my mum was in the hospital crying her eyes out. Then on the 7th I was staying at my new boyfriend's place when I had this sick feeling again, and I immediately knew something bad was going to happen. He lived fairly close to the hospital, so I ran there, as he didn't have a car. When I arrived at the info desk, I said my pregnant mother was here, but the lady said there was no one with that name registered. And boom, in that moment an ambulance arrived in the emergency driveway and my mum was there. She had complications and the baby never survived. I've never had this weird foreshadowing sensation since, but it was creepily accurate. I worked in a nursing home years ago, and there was a woman that I absolutely loved on the Alzheimer's wing. She was very confused but was absolutely sweet. She also had an extra sense and can predict when someone was about to leave us for good, although she couldn't express what it was due to her confusion. She would randomly pack up all of her belongings into bags and move into the lobby stating she was moving out. She would insist she was waiting for a bus and that it was coming down the road if I could only look for it. The thing is, she would do this for days at a time. You might chalk it up to her Alzheimer's, but she only ever did this when a resident was about to pass. The minute they would pass, she would move back and complain how she missed the bus. This happened every single time without fail. Even one staff member that passed away suddenly. She didn't know the majority of them and wouldn't have remembered if she did. We used to predict that someone was passing by her behavior. In the 7 years I was there, she did this hundreds of times, without fail, and was always right. I've had this happen with both people and animals. A certain knowing that they're going to pass away. I was sitting with my cat on the couch one day giving him pets, and I just knew his life was going to end soon. So I needed to make the most of our time together. Less than 2 weeks later, my aunt with dementia left the door open, and my cat, who's strictly indoor, wandered out. My dad and I searched for him all night and couldn't find him. The next morning we found him, dead, in the driveway. When I was 10 or so, it happened as well. My great aunt was in the hospital, and I randomly started to draw an angel. My mum asked what I was drawing, and I told her it was an angel for Aunt Betty. She just died. Immediately after that, the phone rang, and Mum answered. My great aunt had passed away. We had no indication she was going to do so. My mum was super creeped out and shocked. She asked how I knew. I simply shrugged. I didn't know myself. Columbus Day weekend 4 years ago, my best friend was very depressed. Her life was falling apart and everything just sucked for her. I go away with my school for the weekend, and on my first night I had a dream where she talked to me, saying how things were better for her and she felt better. She told me to follow my dreams and that I could be anything I wanted. She apologized and asked me to tell her parents it wasn't their fault, said a few personal things, and then was gone. I wake up right away. I was freezing cold even though I was wearing lots of blankets. I immediately called her, but she didn't pick up. I freaked out and sent her a text saying these words: "Life is too precious to end so fast. I love you, and I know everything will pass. I love you, and I want to grow old with my best friend by my side." She called me right away, crying. She was about to drive her car off a bridge, notoriously known for people taking their own life. In 2016, a little girl went missing in the Montreal area, which is where I'm from. She must have been around 10, and I saw a bunch of posts about her disappearance everywhere on social media. A few weeks after they started looking for her, I was traveling in Brazil, and I was staying in a small hostel. I hadn't thought about this girl in weeks, since I didn't really use social media during the trip. But one night I had the weirdest dream. I dreamt I was at my mother's sitting on the balcony and decided to have a walk to the driveway and open the back door of her car. In the car was the missing child. I thought, "Oh my God, I found you, we gotta call for help." And she let me know there was no need for help anymore. That's when I understood she was dead, and her face started to change into a creepy way. I woke up, panicked, breathless, and drenched in sweat. I was really shaken. I couldn't go back to sleep for a while, so I decided to check Facebook just to change my mind. Bad idea. 10 seconds after I started scrolling down, I saw a post about the missing child case. They had found her body a few hours ago. Needless to say, I didn't sleep after. Part of me really thinks the fact that I saw it all over the news in the weeks before made my subconscious create that weird dream. But damn, when it happened it was really scary, and I still get chills when I think about it. My sister has also experienced something similar when we were kids. She was having lots of nightmares, and it was scaring the crap out of me when she'd tell me about it. At one point, she dreamt of a man laying on a stretch cover with a sheet, and when she unveiled the body it was our neighbor, who was 19. A few days later we learned he had taken his life. I only learnt about her dreams years later, but it shook my sister. For a while she thought it was somehow her fault, and to this day she hates to talk about it. One day I was alone in the backyard of my boyfriend's house, swinging on the porch swing, when I saw his black lab obviously walking towards me slowly. Eventually she made her way to me and sat down right in front of my legs, so I stopped swinging. She looked at me in the eyes, and all of a sudden I got this overwhelming feeling that she was about to pass away. She seemed sad, a little scared and confused. I got the feeling that she needed comfort and reassurance, so I sat there with her and stroked her ears to fur, telling her how good she was and that everything would be alright, telling her she was truly loved and not to be afraid. After a few minutes, she seemed to feel better and began to wander off again. I told my boyfriend that he needed to pet his girl and give her kisses, and he did. I didn't fill him in on my experience with her just moments before, though. The next day, he called me crying. His mother had accidentally run over his dog when she was backing out of the garage, and unfortunately she was so injured, they decided to put her down. This isn't the first time this kind of thing happened to me, and it happened to me with people too. I don't know why. I can sort of sense when other people's lives are coming to an end, and I don't really know what to do with this kind of information. His dog's death struck a chord with me though, because she was young and healthy. She sensed her end coming too. Most animals and people are surprised by their endings, at least the ones I've witnessed anyway. I was travelling with some mates in the Greek islands. We'd been there for a few weeks and I felt 100% safe. You could leave your life savings, which wasn't much as a backpacker, on a banana lounge and it wouldn't be touched for days. Anyway, there was a wet t-shirt competition and we were up front discerning the quality of the competition, and all of a sudden I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, almost like I felt sick. I was dead certain something bad was going to happen. I moved to the back and started watching our stuff. It took maybe 10 minutes, and someone came past and swiped my mate's bags with everything he had in it. I chased them down and got it back. To this day, the only way to describe the feeling is supernatural. I'm a believer of something else. What, I have no idea. But honestly, that was a pretty wild experience. When I was in first grade, I was heavily bullied not only by older students but by my teachers too. I was very socially awkward and hyperactive due to having undiagnosed high-functioning Asperger's syndrome. I didn't have any friends, as I just didn't know how to make any, and would be that kid in the corner of the cafeteria alone, and would rather stay inside than go outside for recess. About halfway through my first grade year, I was getting my drawing books from the locker when I turned around to walk back into the classroom. Some older kids shoved one of my classmates into me and knocked me over, and I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I was somewhere warm and by a body of crystalline blue water and laying on a wooden pier. I immediately stood up and looked around and saw a man and a young boy who I recognized from my classes on a jet ski, but he looked somewhat older. They were coming up fast to the pier, and when they were getting close to it, a different and bigger boat came out of nowhere. The man had to make a quick and awkward 180, turn close to where the pier was to avoid getting hit by this boat, but in doing so caused the young boy to fly off the jet ski and hit his head on the pier at an angle that caused his neck to snap. This vision was so detailed that I heard his neck break. Then I blacked out again, and when I opened my eyes, I was laying on the ground in the hallway, and the boy I saw in the vision was looking down at me. He asked if I was okay, and if I wanted help picking up my stuff, and I nodded to him. I got up and we got my drawing books, and he introduced me to himself and was telling me his name was AJ, and asked him mine. I told him it was Drew. I looked at AJ and quickly awkwardly asked, "Do you want to be my friend?" And from that point on we became practically inseparable. By the end of the first grade, AJ had helped me break out of my shell and also would stand up to any bullies I dealt with. He even stood up to 2 teachers who harassed me on a regular basis. I was actually happy to have made my very first friend and felt like he was the only friend I could ever need. Second grade comes and goes, then third grade. We had just gotten back from winter break, and AJ excitedly told me his mum and dad were going down to Florida to celebrate his birthday at the end of January, and when he got back, he was going to invite me to his first ever birthday party that they would have in February. I was super excited for this, as I had never once been invited to anyone's birthday party. Well, the week came for him to go on his vacation, and the next week came. I ran into class excited to see my friend for the first time in a week, but he wasn't there. I assumed he was sick. Well, a day turned into a week, and a week turned into a month. A month turned into the rest of the school year, and the final school year I would have at this elementary because I was being transferred to a new one since my parents were moving to a different part of town. About a week after the school year ended, my mum got a letter from AJ's parents, and I asked her what it said, and if it was the invitation to his birthday party. She sighed and shook her head, and said it was close to bedtime and she'll tell me about it when I'm older. A bit later that night, I was laying in bed tossing and turning, unable to sleep. I was so focused on having to know what the letter said about AJ that I tiptoed my way down to the kitchen, and I could hear my mum listening to music while she was working in the other room, so I made my way to the kitchen and saw the letter on the table and read it. My joy that I thought I would have from finally hearing from my friend turned into complete, agonizing horror. It said that AJ had died in a jet ski accident in Florida. The vision I had in first grade immediately flooded back into my head, and I started bawling my eyes out, and I could only think of one thing. It was my fault. I could have stopped it. This led me to not wanting to talk or make friends with anyone for the next 4 years. In fact, I was 8 at that time. The next friend I made was when I was 13 in 7th grade. I blamed myself for AJ's death for an entire decade. I was almost 19 when I finally made peace with what happened, and by talking with a very good friend of mine called Talia. I was only 6 when I had that vision. There was no way I could have known what it meant. That was the story of my very first and very personal traumatic premonition. I still have them to this day, but none have been as detailed or as cleared as AJ's death. I still cry when sharing this story. Although I'm 23 now, there's not a single day that goes by where I think about him. Have you ever had a premonition? I've had 4, and 3 have come to pass. The first was in Hurricane Katrina. When I was a boy, 2 through 7, I drew pictures of a city being destroyed by tornadoes and water, based on a scary dream. I grew up in New Orleans in the 1990s. Many years later, those same drawings were forever lost when my family home was flooded in 2005 after the levees broke. We lost everything, but not our lives. My grandmother was a Taoist and believed I predicted our loss over a decade in advance through spiritual means. The second was the Bataclan attacks. A week before the Friday the 13th attack in Paris, I had a recurring nightmare of a gunman killing me and other people in a city I did not recognize, but a place I understood as a concert stage. I told my wife about the rock star murder dream, and she believed I dreamt of the Pantera guitarist, though I did not believe this theory because it didn't sound right to me. There were too many dead people in my nightmare. When the ISIS attack happened, I instinctively knew that it occurred in the same place as my dream. However, I did not feel guilty because I fully understood there was nothing I could have done. The third was my grandmother's death. This one was much more personal. My grandmother was very ill in late 2016 and sure to die. Because of the meme that 2016 would kill everyone, I have half-heartedly joked that she would not survive it either. One night I went to bed after many hours, and in my dream I was a boy again and sitting next to my sleeping father and sitting grandmother. She then stood from her rocking chair and said she had to go. When I asked where she was going, she repeated her words. I said to her, "You're sick, you can't go anywhere." She pointed to my father and said, "He's the sick one." She did not explain what she meant. She said 2 last things before the final goodbye, but they were personal, and then said, "I love you," and left through a white wooden door. I was awoken from my dream by a phone call from my mother, saying my grandmother had just passed away. When I was 16, I fell asleep at my desk at school, and my brother woke me up. He startled me so bad that he said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him I dreamed I had a wreck and was about to die. I could see headlights about to hit me. 6 hours later, I flipped a car 4 times and was ejected from the vehicle and almost rolled over by my car. When I regained consciousness, my car lights were pointed at me exactly like my dream. Messed me and my friend up pretty bad, left some huge scars on my face, but that single event is responsible for me falling in love with my wife and ultimately my kids being born, so I'm good with my scars. In December 2018, I was visiting some friends in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and staying with them. I was traveling with my Portuguese girlfriend. One of the roommates, called Hannah, came into the front room where people would sleep and started a conversation with us. She started talking about fortune tellers, psychics, mediums, etc., and people who would see people's future and past. At the end of the conversation, I told Hannah that it was interesting how she told us all of this. One day before, I was going to a psychic for the first time. Another friend had planned with me to visit the next day in another part of Nova Scotia, but we didn't tell anyone about it, not even my girlfriend. Hannah told me a few things in that conversation, namely how she wouldn't want to know anything about her current relationship because it would be really crappy if you were with someone and you were told it wouldn't last. That would be depressing. She also mentioned dragonflies being a sign of hers, or maybe the sign of her friend who told her some of the stories. The day comes, and my good friend Laura took me to see a spirit guide. No one paid for anything, that was just some kind of destiny. Her name was Julie. I'd never met her before, and she wouldn't know anything about me or my girlfriend. Yet she did. We were invited into her home. It was cozy, and I went in with an open mind, and I didn't believe in anything really, but there's no way all of this is just a string of endless coincidences. She started reading me. She gazed into me, and I looked away while I was sat on a bar stool in her own kitchen. I felt that looking into her eyes for however long would be pretty awkward. She began talking so quickly she wouldn't even pause for a moment. I didn't say a single word the entire duration I just listened. You're followed and protected by 4 spirits, 2 of which you don't know are dead. When I was 4 years old, my grandfather died. I also lost a friend who was the son of Laura, who took me to see the spirit guide. Aside from that, I didn't lose any other friends or family, but my lifestyle has been where people come and go, and I'd met many people and lost a number of friends for life, but had to part ways, so it made sense. Not to get overly analytical, but 4 had always been my favourite number and magic number. You're going to have a change of transportation. This was a random one that confused me. Because of all the travelling in my life, I've never had to change plans. The next day it happened. We were supposed to hire a car and drive to Montreal, but the car hire wasn't accepting her license because her country has a very specific restriction of driving in Canada. I'd never heard of such a thing. We had to abandon that and catch a bus the next day instead. That's not all. We needed about 5 or 6 buses as it took 25 hours to get there. The first bus broke down on the highway within an hour. In the snow, 2 changes of transportation, right after the day we were told. Syria. Something happened in Syria. Every time I've thought about this since, it gets creepier and creepier. My girlfriend's brother was in the Portuguese Air Force and went to Syria to fight ISIS. ISIS captured him and removed his head. There was a documentary about this, but I never found it. My girlfriend didn't tell me this until after we left. Julie didn't know my girlfriend, or her name, or anything about her in advance, so this isn't something you could search for. You lost an important necklace. When Julie was reading my girlfriend, she said this. No more than 7 days earlier, she lost her necklace her aunt gave her. Her aunt had passed away. She told me this 2 to 4 days before we met Julie, so we were both shocked to hear this because my girlfriend had only just told me. There were also so many obscure things from my past I hadn't even thought about in the last 15 years. You couldn't make it up. He wants to tell you, comrade. My friend that died in 2015 knew me for years. We would address each other as comrade because we were game developers that ran a very famous military genre gaming community, but I completely forgot about this little thing. It was a reminder. Don't worry about money, it will come. I wasn't sure what she meant, but at the time because my finances were always the same and stable. But a few months later things became more complicated, but I handled it. Then I had a golden opportunity to earn 6 figures on a project in May 2020. The person offering the deal was very nice, but something inside me told me to wait. 2 weeks later, borders, airports and stores all over the world shut down because of COVID. As of writing this, it's still happening. But if this is also true, then perhaps whatever mess this virus will put me in, I'll be okay for in the end. You have a question about your relationship. She said this to both of us. There was literally not a word more on this subject of relationship, as Hannah said to us the day before that it would suck to know your future. I immediately knew what Julie meant. She was my girlfriend and I her boyfriend, but we never defined it. We met casually and just kept seeing each other. We never said I love you. We just existed together. We got along well, but never actually talked about our relationship. A few months later we broke up, and haven't seen each other since. We didn't even have a relationship status on Facebook. Ever since that day, many months later I kept seeing dragonflies, all because Hannah told me that she or her friend kept seeing them. I saw a real alive dragonfly for the first time in years shortly after this. I saw decorations of it in stores everywhere. I have also seen things before they happen. In January 2020 I had a dream of a plane crash. I was living in Lima, Peru at the time, and a few hours later a plane crashed in Iran and had lots of news coverage. I also sensed that I was having a baby girl when my wife, the the new girlfriend after the one I visited Julie with was pregnant. I had such confidence, yet my family of the Whites is cursed with boys. I have a brother, we have a father, he has a brother and a sister, but the sister has a son, and the son 2 twin sons. That older son of my aunt's now has 2 twin sons. He not only has twin brothers, but also twin sons. My brother also has a son, and despite all of this, I knew I was going to have a girl. I made a goodie bag, put in lots of pink stuff, and sent it from Peru to my parents to simultaneously give them gifts and announce the pregnancy. Not only this, but I told anyone what my daughter's name would be. My parents gave me a gift, a blanket with the moon on it. Her name is Luna. Anyway, I'd be fascinated to know of any similar experiences. When I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school, I had a group of maybe 8 or so friends that had been staying over a Friday. I was one of those kids that hung out with every group in school, so the group was diverse. Some of the group smoked cigarettes, so we'd find ourselves on my back porch every hour or so. Mind you, the weather was warm enough to wear shorts outside around midnight or 1 a.m, so we'd stay outside and hang out and talk and just be teenagers. Due to how I grew up, I've learned to always trust my instincts and know to always listen to it. So I found it odd that not only myself, but 3 of my guests, my guy best friend Simon, girl best friend Janet, and another good friend of ours, B, had this ominous feeling that something bad was going to happen that night. It started around 11 p.m. and continued to get worse as the night went on, as we were constantly exchanging uneasy glances. We had no idea if this was something for one of us, someone we knew, or just something terrible in general. After about 30 minutes, we exchanged looks. A group of around 5 people decided to go on the back porch and smoke and chat. When Simon, Janet, B, and myself got out of the back porch, the unease put a knot in my stomach, so I knew something was close. As everyone else is laughing and having some fun conversations, we suddenly hear this ear-splitting sound that seemed to echo off the mountain when it happened. It had been the metal from a car hitting something. We immediately turned around to see a car on the other side of the lake directly across my house that was wrapped around a telephone pole. In shock, everyone started screaming to call the police, which is exactly what we did. Now remember how the 4 of us had that feeling? Yeah, we could feel the tingles shooting through our bodies. I mean the dread kind, where it feels like spider webs all over your body. At this point, we were petrified that it could have been one of our friends from school or something like that, as back in the early 2000s we would go up to the woods and party, especially during the summer, so it wasn't uncommon to see people flying down the hills late at night. As we saw the fire trucks and emergency vehicles approach, we couldn't help watch the scene until almost everything was completely cleared from the road. We knew someone had gotten badly hurt, because we saw 2 stretchers being brought out, ran to the car, but only one going back to the ambulance. It took the firefighters, police, and EMTs around 3 hours to completely clean everything up and get the car towed away. It had been a difficult night to sleep because the crash just kept repeating in my mind, as I had never heard anything like it. I hoped that the people inside the car weren't too badly hurt. Simon and Janet also had the same sleeping issues, so we ended up staying until we couldn't keep our eyelids open anymore. Our group checked that whole weekend for some sort of news, but we didn't hear anything until that next week at school. Not thinking much of it, we had a good friend not show up for school that Monday, because she tended to be late with her smiley face and bedhead hairstyle. I was completely jealous of her beautiful natural black curly hair that went past her waist, and she never put it up. During the last part of the day, however, we came to learn that this same friend was with her boyfriend, she in the passenger seat and him driving, that Friday night, going home from a party up in the forest. She had been completely sober, because she had been trying to better her life, which didn't include alcohol. He, on the other hand, was not. He ended up wrapping the car completely around the telephone pole due to a fight they'd been having about the party. Our group were the ones to witness the crash and call it in. The person we had seen on the stretcher that night was her. We learned that she died on impact, while her boyfriend survived with some broken bones and bruises. She had just turned 16 while he was 19. He's in jail now for life with no chance of parole. May she rest in peace. Everything started in March of 2023, when we decided to franchise a chicken restaurant. We decided to start with 2 shops, so basically we would have to pay for 2 different shops and franchises. One of the locations we decided to rent was in the downtown of Merida in Mexico, which is a very old part of the city. In fact, the oldest. The shop was located on 60th Street, one of the main streets that goes across the city. It's an important area downtown, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and we rented the shop in May and signed the contract. The first time I went to the shop, I liked it, and we went back and forth several times, but I didn't really want to rent it. That was my initial feeling. The franchise started pressuring us since it was a great location and a lot of people walk by every day, so we decided to go for it. At the same time, we rented another shop elsewhere. The shop had a totally different vibe. It was incredibly easy to rent, and we were fond of the landlord. This is in contrast to the downtown shop, which was anything but easy. Everything was very stressful. The energy was heavy to begin with, and it was very difficult to get contractors, and everything took a very long time. And at the start, we had lots of issues with the street and permits because the city had its complicated rules, and that felt threatening and stressful. It was taking us a very long time. 2 months had passed, we were hemorrhaging money, and still couldn't open. And of course, we wanted to open and start work. It took us a while to make the changes to the layout inside and everything. And we'd already spent a considerable amount of money, and we kept going. We managed to open the other franchise first, and still a month later we couldn't get this first one open. And we were desperate, as we were paying rent with 0 income. So I decided to go to a shop where a woman sold all kinds of magic stuff, like cleaning oils, sprays, incense, angels and stuff. When the owner saw me, she said that she saw me very desperate and that my aura looked eaten. "You're correct," I said. "Every time I go to my downtown shop, I feel like I'm being laughed and ridiculed because I just can't open it." That being said, I mentioned it to my neighbor because she has the ability to speak to angels. My neighbor said that she'd asked the angels about it, and she performed a session without me. She said that we had to ask for some kind of permission, and then told me to pray, and gave me a ton of prayers. I bought a bunch of angel cards and a San Benito medal. That night, I had a dream where I could see the shop was directly built on top of some catacombs, and I felt that I had to go down the catacombs, and as I advanced, I could see the size of the tunnels, as there were also some kind of beings guarding them. That's when I realized I needed to ask for permission. The next day I spoke with my neighbor about it, and told her that I understood what was going on. We needed to get permission. So she connected with the angels and they told her that it was the only way to open it. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I agreed. She mentioned that she needed to do some cleaning, so she was going to work with the energy. This was before the weekend and happened on a Friday. She told me she was going to send the energy to cleanse the place. You just stay away. And on Monday or Tuesday, you return to see if you now feel welcomed. I said it was fine. The very same day, after midday, we were in the house when my mum suddenly said, "You know what? I'm starting to see things, like shadows flying." And I even saw a weird thing in one of my plants. It was like a small creature just hanging there with a mocking face. And I said, "You know what? Why don't you guys wait in the car? I'll ask my neighbor for some advice. I have 2 sons and the girl that helped me at the time, and my mum waiting outside in the car." I went quickly to my neighbors and told her, "Listen, we're starting to see things, what do we do?" She gave me some holy water. I lit a candle and some incense in order to do some cleansing. I happened to have a protection bracelet with a Turkish eye. At the 2 ends of the bracelet, there were 2 metal beads, and when I entered the house, the 2 beads started vibrating. I then began walking in circles, and as soon as I entered the house I felt this cold draft blowing, and also some kind of noise inside the house. It was a very odd sensation. I felt a lot of chills run down my spine. Nevertheless, I thought this is my house and I need to cleanse it. So I began sprinkling holy water, praying and blessing each window, blessing each door, blessing each mirror. When I was doing the living room, I saw a shadow fly up. As I stepped into my room, I noticed our massive window spanning from wall to wall. The heavy curtains hanging from the ceiling to the floor worsened the atmosphere. Despite their weight, there was a strange sense of presence behind them, almost as if someone was lurking in the shadows. Each time I approached, the curtains remained undisturbed, yet the feeling persisted, and after leaving a candle with the image of the Virgin Mary, I left the house. Upon our return, the eerie noises and coldness had dissipated, leaving the room feeling calm. The following Monday, feeling more at ease, I decided to seek permission to continue living in the house. I assured the owner, whatever or whoever that meant, that I would be considerate of the space and requested the same courtesy in return. This happened by the end of July. I want to mention that I've always been sensitive to these kind of things, but I actually didn't know what I was doing when I asked for permission to enter the shop. I didn't even understand who I was asking permission from. When I found out they were catacombs, I looked online to see if any of this was true, and I found out that in Merida, an underground city was built over, connected with a location 100 kilometers away from the center. During this month, I experienced a lot of things, not very positive ones, like snakes at the entrance of my house. I dreamt about these snakes a few times crawling between my legs, and I had lots of nightmares, and I could hear the voice of a woman that wanted to talk to me, but it was very distorted and I could never understand her. It sounded like when you hear someone talking underwater, that kind of distortion, and I always heard that as if the person was 3 or 4 feet away from me. Months passed, and between July and the end of December, we lost a lot of money from this shop. We started to lose even more. We had to pay all the salaries from our own money, and it was very sad that no matter the effort we made, it was as if we were invisible, and people didn't grasp the concept of the franchise. They even complained about the prices, the chicken too small or the serving wasn't large enough, and by the end of December, we were ready to move on and shut up shop. During these months, every month, every week, we had dark nights because we were frustrated that things weren't working out. We knew that some of the employees were stealing from us. Some of the employees stole items from the shop. They stole the phone, the speakers. Things were looking bleak. And in December, I gave up. I didn't feel like I cared anymore. I couldn't deal with it. And I started the process of thinking differently. And in January, I decided I was going to do things differently. I started meditating and listening to podcasts on positivity. I decided that I needed to do this in a very different way because we ran out of money and we were in a situation where we didn't see an ending to it. So in January, we decided that we were going to close it up, but we didn't know how long the process was going to take. We took the courage to say, that's it, January. We knew it was going to be a challenging month. We were expecting December to be a great month of sales, but we didn't get those. We knew January was likely a make or break point, and we managed to continue to be open, and everything started perking up, emotionally for me. I started feeling like I was on a roller coaster. Some days were good, some days not. I asked my neighbor about how I could close up, when you asked permission and that was it. So it took us a few weeks to decide if we were even going to continue. Then in the second week of February, sales were worse than ever, and after catching one of our employees stealing, I thought, I can't take this anymore. We need to close this shop for good. From one day to another, literally I went to say, okay guys, this is going to be our last week, so we need to close. This is going to be our last shift, which was on February 14th. By Friday, we needed to basically clean and close up. I asked the same lady who I asked to enter the premises with help about the closure. And so we closed, said our goodbyes, and that night I had another revealing dream. That was the third part of this adventure. I really want you to make sure you understand that these events that happened between July and January were the darkest ones. It feels like when I look at pictures, I don't see pictures of us smiling or laughing or having fun. It's just a blur. That night that I had the second dream, I think it was when I said goodbye to the shop. When I closed it, knocked on the door and said my goodbyes. That's it from here, saying thank you because they let me be in that space. I thought it was just going to be it, but I think it took a few months before things came back to normal. In this second dream, I was in my room, as I usually sleep on the right-hand side of the bed next to the window. I have a nightstand, and there is this window that goes from the roof to the floor, as well as the curtains. I saw myself standing up. There was no bed, and I saw the little kid of my neighbor, the neighbor who claimed to speak with angels. And this kid is desperate, trying to tell her mother that he can see them, that they're there, and she doesn't want to see. She's looking back and forth, with no aim, and her eyes were looking vacantly at nowhere in particular. She was just walking back and forth like she was trying really hard to ignore what the kid said. And next to the door there's this entity, this noise, this blackness. It looked like a bunch of black scribbles, like moving knots. Instead of having a head, the entity would just have these black lines moving in circles. And instead of eyes, it had two red flames at a certain angle, as if expressing anger, as if it really didn't have a proper body. No abdomen or torso of any kind. It was just limbs. It looked more like noise and heaviness that made me feel scared. Then I realized there was one keeping the door and another one right next to me in the corner of my room. The little boy looked really desperate because he wanted to leave the room. He managed to do so, and I saw how he exited the room. I didn't see my neighbor or the little boy again in the dream, but now I saw a woman next to a table. The table was really low to the ground and she was drawing. She looked desperate too, and asked me to draw all these kinds of tube lines. There were 7 lines, and on top of some triangle shape. It looked like organ pipes that were organized in a way that the smallest one would be in the middle, and the rest like a wave. I couldn't understand what it was, but she kept asking me desperately to draw them. She felt so real, I thought. No, I'm not doing anything. From there, I started asking other people for help. I started taking therapy and really started focusing on the light, and what I meant with the light is the absence of dark. The light is within me, since I was not connected to my light. Thankfully, one of the people giving me therapy told me, yes, I'm glad you didn't draw anything, because you didn't know what it meant. And so I continued with this set of positive thinking. But things weren't over. When I closed the shop, one of the employees started calling the others to talk about me. She told me that she would sue me because I basically fired her, which I didn't. She allegedly said she was unfairly dismissed, but I told her the truth. I'm sorry, but I don't have a job for you. Anyway, I did what I was legally supposed to do, gave them enough notice and job recommendations, and next, she called me out of the blue and told me she was pregnant. That was enough to deal with. I also kept dreaming about snakes. One day we started hearing a squeaking in our kitchen, and when we investigated, found out we had mice. The situation lasted for 10 days, just to find out they had infested the kitchen. And so, first there was one, and then there were loads. And we had to do lots of deep cleaning until we got rid of all of them, which was not great, because we felt invaded in our own house by these little creatures making hole in our food and making everything dirty, and that they were taking over the house. It felt like a big downer because it seemed like it was never going to end. That was too much, but I kept going towards the light. I also wanted to recover some of the money from the shop, so I started to look for someone who might be interested in taking the lease of the shop and maybe sell some of our equipment. It took weeks and weeks, over 2 months. It was taking us a very long time to leave that place, as we did when we first arrived. All of these things happened where I couldn't understand why they were occurring. One day, after doing everything I could, I very boldly sold all the stuff and took the rest of the other shop, and then came back to deal with the landlord. It wasn't easy, but I guessed it was the best outcome. In spite of leaving my short term and not respecting the 1-year contract, I still lost a lot of money, that I hope will come back to us in other ways in the end. After that, we ended up closing the other business too, and to whoever needs to hear this, it's always darkest before the sun comes out. Just remember the light is not outside, it's inside, and the only thing you need to do is surrender. You know, after working in hospitality for almost 15, nearly 20 years, you realize you still don't know everything, and that life is going to throw more curveballs at you. I know I made a deal with people who were not real, and with things and places such as underworlds that I didn't know existed. The only thing you need to know is that you can't find the answers, because what is missing in your life is to be connected to the light of the universe, the angels, the Holy Spirit, or whatever you want to call or believe in. The secret is to always look up. But for now, that's all I have to say, and I hope to never have to return to that shop again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Here's to hoping you enjoyed tonight's collection of paranormal stories. It's a subject that I've had for a number of years called Premonition, and I never actually got enough stories to make the full video. I thought the topic was really interesting, and also because YouTube algorithm punishes basically anything that is a bit different, I was a bit afraid they would not really perform well. So I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. If you'd like more of these stories in future, let me know. And in about 4 years, when I find enough, maybe I'll do another. But until then, a huge thank you as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you'd like your name at the end of the video, bonus content and the like, feel free to follow me over on Patreon for free and get the occasional bonus content or membership as well. Anyway, that's it from me. Stay awesome, hopefully watch more, links on screen now, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.